Good afternoon. This is the time and place for a workshop before the board. Possible action regarding proposed amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 5 regarding without limitation, delineating when an area meets the requirement that it be open to the public without any manner of access restrictions such that gaming may be conducted in the area. This is a provision that's required under NRS 4630129. And let's open it to public comment, please.
This item is placed on the agenda to give the public an opportunity to comment on gaming-related matters.
Okay, is there any public comment in the north? I see none. In the south, any public comment here? Okay, Madam Secretary, this workshop has been properly noticed in accordance with the open meeting law?
Yes, it has.
Okay, wonderful. All right, I'd like to start with Dag Mandela, Senior Dag McKella. Please provide some background for us.
Thank you, Chair Gibson. Good afternoon, Chair Gibson, Member Katsaros, Member Watkins. For the record, I'm John McKella with the Attorney General's Office. The purpose of the workshop today is to solicit comments on a new regulation regarding the accessibility of gaming by the general public. If the regulation appears ready, you may also recommend it to the Commission for adoption. The draft date of the proposed changes before you today is December 8th, 2021. The intent of these changes is to promulgate a regulation regarding the accessibility of gaming to the general public. The genesis of this proposed regulation is a prior board commitment to the legislature during a hearing on SB 46 in 2019 to create such a regulation. Turning to the sections of the proposed regulation. Section 1 specifies chair means the chair of the board or the chair's designee.
Can I stop you just right there? So just to motivate, just make sure that everyone understands the motivation for this reg or proposed reg. So 2019 session, SB 46, included originally language that defined open and accessible?
My understanding is that there was a provision that mandated the board and commission adopt a regulation defining open and accessible.
Okay, and if I can just complete the record, go to Chief Taylor. Chief Taylor, it's 2022 now. Do you believe this is still necessary?
Yes, this is James Taylor, for the record, Chief of Enforcement. We still get a lot of requests from the industry or have been for many years about what they can and can't do. We have our own internal policies of how we answer that. It would be nice to have something in regulation that we can actually point them to.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So subsection 1 specifies chair means chair designee. Subsection 2 restates 463.0129 subsection 1E that gaming be open to the general public without any manner of access restrictions. Subsection 3 sets out what areas will generally be considered open to the public. A includes areas directly accessible from a main exterior entrance. B includes areas connected to areas directly accessible from a main exterior entrance. C includes areas near shopping, restaurants, and convention space. 3C specifically omits bars, as it would be easy to place a small bar in some out-of-the-way place. 3D allows the chair to make determinations about other areas as to whether they are open to the public without any manner of restrictions on access. Subsection 4 sets out areas which are specifically deemed to not be open to the general public and/or have restrictions on access. Before I get into the lettered subsections of subsection 4, there is one change that I would recommend to the language as proposed, and that would be to move the except as otherwise specified in subsection 3 of this section up to the beginning of subsection 4 so that it applies to all parts of subsection 4. Right now it is only in 4C. 4A includes areas which require access through a corridor containing hotel rooms. 4B includes areas which require access through the use of an elevator. If you refer to subsection 3, this would not include areas accessible by elevator near shopping, restaurants, and convention space. 4C includes areas where the general public cannot observe games in the area. And then turning to subsection 5, whereas subsection 3 sets out what areas are generally open to the public, subsection 5 sets out specific areas that are open to the public without restrictions on access. 5A includes games offered to a private party as long as the same gaming opportunities are available elsewhere in the gaming area and the general public has an unobstructed view of the gaming offered to a private party. 5B includes tournaments and contests offered in a ballroom or convention space, as long as the general public may observe the tournaments and contests without paying an admission fee. I would note that this does not prevent a licensee from applying for approval to hold an event restricting access to the general public under NRS 463.408, and it's my understanding that the board routinely processes those applications for tournaments presently. Subsection 5C includes club venues and day pools with certain requirements regarding signs and admissions without fees. This does not prevent a licensee from requesting approval to instate a fee for admission pursuant to regulation 5.210 and NRS 463.15995. 5D creates a grandfather provision for areas existing on January 1st, 2022, as long as the licensee makes a request to continue offering gaming in the area within 30 days of the adoption of the proposed regulation. The way this is written, it's a very simple process. There are some conditions the chair of the board could put on it, but because these areas exist today, this would allow the board to know exactly what and where these areas are moving forward. And then if a licensee chooses not to submit this to the board, that area would not be considered open to the public 45 days after adoption by the commission. Subsection 6 explicitly sets out the exceptions to the proposed regulation. Subsection 7 allows for the temporary closure of a gaming area, and subsection 8 allows the entrances to a gaming area to be temporarily closed for public safety reasons. And going back, I think I neglected to mention subsection, no, I did mention subsection 3B, which allows the chair to make additional determinations. These changes should be effective upon adoption and approval by the commission. This workshop was scheduled to solicit comments. However, if you feel the regulation is ready for recommendation to the commission after you receive the comments, such recommendation is properly noticed and you may recommend the proposed regulation to the commission for adoption. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Senior Dag McKellar. If you would, just take us through 463. And so 0129 is a general requirement that, I mean, that's the policy that everyone cites to. It's as old as the Gaming Control Act. It's been amended over time. So, but the open and accessible piece that's included in 0129. Subsequently, legislature comes forward. If you can explain this, they contravene that open and accessible language expressed by allowing for private gaming salons.
That's correct, Mr. Chair. And that is found, so in 463.0129 subsection 1E, the end of that states must not be restricted in any manner except as provided by the legislature. Right. And so as you mentioned, gaming salons are specific exceptions created by the legislature. You also have special events, which is found in 463.408. And then in addition, you have 463.15995, which allows the board to set up regulations authorizing licensees to charge a fee to enter an area. And the caveat with that one is those regulations can't be used to create private gaming. So there has to be another purpose for that area in order to get approval by a regulation promulgated under that statute. So the example of this is, I believe there are nightclubs that have applied for this exception. And that is codified in regulation 5.210.
Right.
Just a quick follow-up on that one. So the last example that you use with regard to a club, then, if they wanted to somehow cordon off an area and make it tantamount to being private, that's sort of that prohibition there, which is you can do the entry fee for the club, even though they have gaming in there, and then not run afoul of that provision. I'm stating that correctly.
Right, it authorizes a fee to be charged even though there's gaming in the area. And the caveat I mentioned would apply to clubs because their sole purpose is not to create private gaming, it's to hold a club. They just want gaming in the club.
Okay, thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for.
That's helpful. Thank you very much, Senior Dad Kella. If you just stay there for 1 second. Chief Taylor, in practical terms, how does open and accessible work with regard to enforcement?
So James Taylor for the record, this has been an ongoing issue for a lot of years, as it says open accessible and you can't restrict in any manner. So the lines have kind of been blurred over the years of what is acceptable out there. And we have licensees that have gaming kind of off the beaten path that the public wouldn't even know it's down there. We make them put a sign up saying public gaming, down this hallway or on the second floor. The licensees have asked to have public gaming on the high rise in their hotel tower at the top floors. We have denied that for quite a while, and then recently we approved it. It just would. There's questions that come in about can they sanction off areas for celebrity guests or VIP players? Can they hold tables for certain guests? Can they close rooms for certain parties? There's just a lot of questions that come in to us, and we've not been able to, like I said before, we have our own internal policies that we vet and we try to get back to them on, and we want to stay consistent, but we don't know what that exactly means. What did the legislature mean by open and accessible? We even had properties, when there's protests or busy weekends that they want to shut their doors just to hotel guests. Well, if you're limiting access in any manner, that would be against, the public policy in 0129 as well. And so what we were hoping is to get the regulation that would address all of these different issues and concerns that would give us something to go by.
Thank you very much. So enforcement's position is that this provides guidance with regard to requests for sort of ad hoc, where it's unclear as to what open and accessible is in statute. The original policy, if we can go back in history to 0129's its original form, its formation, promulgation, adoption. So the state's interest is in ensuring that the games that are played, one, that the Gaming Control Board knows where they are, where the play happens, and that taxes and rules and everything else is followed. So and we don't have private games that aren't known to enforcement. Is that accurate? Say?
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
All right. Any further questions from my colleagues?
Certainly. So the list of items that you just mentioned there, Chief Taylor, I didn't quite see those necessarily in this draft, like stanchions. The high rise, I guess, would be in that we talk about an elevator. When we say the notice that gaming is available there, is that where we're talking about in a couple of sections we use terminology that like under 3B in the draft, blah, 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 accessible from a main exterior entrance in such a manner as to permit public notice. When we say permit public notice, you mean requiring public notice? Just say, okay, down that corridor, turn left, not right. It's over there. There is public gaming. You can go in there without getting tackled. It's open and accessible to individuals.
Right, it's, the public knows that it's available upon walking into the casino is
Yeah.
what, 3B is aimed at.
Okay, so that they're provided, there's an advertisement out there, some sort of placard that says, hey, gaming's over here, you can go in there. Correct?
I think 3B would be more than just an advertisement. You could actually see it from a public area that is connected to an exterior door.
Okay, what if it was down a corridor then, I guess, and you couldn't necessarily see it, you go down there and then you open into a room that's, accessible, and then you could, as a visitor to that room, view what's going on.
Well, and as this is presently written, if you have to go down a corridor, and it's not connected to retail or a ballroom, convention center, restaurant, or something like that, it's just down a corridor, that would not be open unless it fit within another uh, part of subsection 3 or subsection 4.
So I guess under sub 3, it would fit if the chair decided it fit.
Right. If the chair looked at that on an individual basis and said, yes, that is open and accessible without any manner of access restriction, then yes, that would fit.
And then the comment in there about being able to be viewed, where is that coming from? Because when I look at 01291E, it talks about general public and the access of general public to gaming activities. Where are we coming in with it has to be viewed sort of from that floor area, the central public space area?
It just goes to it's not hidden away. So if you can see it, it's not hidden. And if something is hidden, that would be a manner of access restriction.
Okay. I guess it comes in that regard, it would be, well, what's considered hidden or not, and that's kind of what we're talking about here a little bit, with regard to it being in a high rise. So that's not necessarily visible immediately. You'd have to navigate up there and what have you.
Right, and even if it was well marked with signs up a high-rise elevator, it could be intimidating to some people to just go up a random elevator to an area well off the main floor.
And so if it's too intimidating, is there a view that would then therefore be considered restricted?
It could be viewed as a restriction on access, and historically, when looking at whether or not a gaming salon can be conditioned to be open to the public, the board has viewed having to go up an elevator as a restriction on access, whereas some gaming salons have been conditioned that if they're adjacent to a gaming floor and can be open to the gaming floor, those can sometimes be open to the public.
Okay. But merely going up an elevator doesn't mean it can't be, it doesn't mean it's a restriction.
No, if there's retail, restaurants, convention space at the top of the elevator, this would specifically state that that is open to the public without any manner of access restriction.
Okay.
With regard to those who have, there are salons that are, well, gaming areas that are both public and private, or deemed public gaming areas that are sort of hidden away, and not hidden, but are, you get to them through Serpentine Hall now. With regard to that, there's signage, which we hope satisfies the public notice part of this. But in addition, there's a grandfathering provision, things that are in place now.
Yes, there's two concepts there, Chair. For gaming salons, we have a specific statute that would be an exception to the
Yeah.
0129 thing that allows that to be private and off the beaten path. And then existing rooms that are not
Right.
salons, yes, those can be grandfathered in pursuant to proposed section 5D.
Sorry.
Yeah, just a quick question, and Member Casaros touched on this a little bit earlier, but is there somewhere else that other than 3B that requires public notice?
Um,
Because the use of this word permit, I guess, doesn't necessarily mandate public notice in conjunction with access and view.
it, it's just something that helps clarify what is considered an access restriction. If you can see it from one of these areas, then there aren't any manner of access restrictions. And then as you get farther away from that area right inside a main exterior entrance, you have to fall into another section. Does that answer your question, Member Watkins?
I don't think so. So what I'm asking is the word permit is used in 3B. So it says, when an area which gaming is conducted is connected to an area directly accessible from a main exterior entrance in such a manner as to permit public notice, access, and view of the gaming area from the area accessible from the exterior entrance. And so this does not necessarily require public notice, access, and view, right?
Well, I guess I viewed that word as when someone walks into an area connected to an exterior door, they can see the next room, the gaming area. I guess it's not so much permission as ability. Um, and if you can think of a better word there, I'm definitely amenable.
Well, I mean, you could say in such a manner providing.
Yes, providing would be a good word. So
Okay, all right,
Yeah, so we don't want to suggest discretion, or just that's a requirement.
right. But is there somewhere else that, in your opinion, I guess, would require it? Because if not, then we would need to change it, right?
would
Is there somewhere else in the regs that would require what's identified in 3?
the public notice, access, and view?
Right,
Um, no, there's nothing else that requires. This is the first attempt at defining 0129 subsection 1E. So there's nothing else presently
okay.
that
So
requires.
we would need to change that then, probably, to providing, as the chair noted.
Right. So
Okay.
providing, I agree, would be a better word than permit.
Okay.
Can I follow up on couple more points, or at least one right now? The stanchions that were brought up, and then the reservation of tables and so forth. How do we currently deal with that? Because just follow my thinking here right now. Under sub 1E of 0129, it says the general public, what they need to have access without restriction to gaming activities. So if you were to put a stanchion so that an individual could feel comfortable because, I don't know, perhaps who they are, and you put one, 5-10 feet so that there's a buffer there, is that something that we're considering to restrict access? Because that didn't, if me as a patron, I walk in there and I see it's so-and-so gambling, perhaps I can't access that table, but do I as an individual have um, the, do I need to be allowed to gamble at that table when I can certainly gamble at 20 other tables? So how do we treat that?
Well, that's been, as I understand it, and Chief Taylor can weigh in further if he would like. It's been an open and hard question presently, and that issue is dealt with in subsection 5A, which allows private parties to have a table within a gaming area as long as same tables, same odds are offered to other people. but people have to be able to watch what that private party is doing. They have to be able to see the game. So with those two requirements, this regulation would define that as open gaming.
So I guess the example of this cornering them off or stanchions use, if you require that they're 1,000 feet away, okay, that's not reasonable, but maybe 10 feet is reasonable or somewhere in between. Is this kind of the questions that surface and then you then have to deal with?
That's correct. This is James Taylor. That's how we're actually dealing with it now, for the most part, is when we vet it out, we do allow them, as long as there's the same table available at the same table limits, we do allow them to reserve a table or to segregate a table off. That's just a policy we've developed over the years. It's not in the regulations, and that's one of the reasons why we're hoping we can uh, codify it in some way for us to deal with this down the road.
Okay, and you think that would cover it in here under that sub 5 here? Okay. Also, the reservation of tables, and so you basically answer that question for me as well, because that was kind of an open question in my head. What do we currently prescribe for, allow for in that regard? Because do I, as an individual, have an expectation that I can gamble at any table? I can tell you if there's a 500 table minimum limit, minimum bet, that's a restriction on me. I can't gamble there, obviously. I can go choose the $5 table, which is what I would normally have done. So there are certain inherent restrictions. So at what point do we cross the threshold of we're actually restricting now? Tables are full. Well, I can't get at a table right now. So that's a restriction on me. Do we expect them to open up new tables? Absolutely not. But generally the public, the way I was reading this always, because this is an interesting topic, I was trying to research as much as I could. Well, what does that mean? Well, I would look at it from a lay person's perspective. No, the general public is not being restricted here. Me as an individual, yeah, I can't gamble at the $500 table because I don't have the wallet to support that, or I can't gamble at this table because it's full. And so the fact that they decide to, open up new tables or not, or what have you, that's up to them, or whether they change the limits, and then maybe the capacity is reached. And so all these things were going through my head, and I was just trying to figure out if what you need here, Chief Taylor, is actually getting covered here, because for me, it starts to get a little convoluted. I'm trying to digest all of this and how we've actually crafted it.
I think Member Katsaros, the focus on restrictions to the general public, it's restrictions on access. So if you can get to the table and watch the table, even if you can't afford to gamble at that table, your access is not restricted to it.
There just seems to be so many scenarios. It's so difficult to capture in a regulation, like the example of the corridor that I have to walk down. Well, I could get to it, but is that an actual restriction? And so what point is it, over the threshold of now you're restricting access? If there's a security guard there saying, no, you can't come in, Phil. Okay, now I'm restricted. But if they're, got a red carpet going, yeah, right down there. I'm just trying to work through it in my head.
I personally dealt with a number of these applications questions. They're fact pattern specific generally, and so there's some discretion for I or you to make a decision about a potential gaming area that might not fit precisely into the definitions here.
Yes, Chair Gibson, and that for the record is in subsection 3D.
And Chief Taylor, if we can ask you again, what are the kinds of things that your agents do in gaming areas? They pick up chips, for example. Is that the case? Cards? What other kinds of things they do?
So our agents, it's James Taylor, our agents have full regulatory access to all areas of the casino. So
Right.
routinely, we do card and dice pickups. We check work card, gaming registrations for employees. We obtain hotel bills, gaming records, other poker room countdowns of chips. Other divisions ask for other records and do other things at the casino. Our agents have free and total access anyway.
Right. Okay, thank you. And just for the record, just to clear that, just to complete that thought process, if what are your thoughts on if let's say a an operator declined to provide you chips or cards. That's a disciplinary type of matter.
Well, that's an issue we would definitely bring to the board and want to take regulatory action. And we need that as regulators. We need that ability. There have been instances in the past where we have had restricted access, and those have been dealt with on the regulatory side to either bring a letter or OSC complaint. We also had a complaint at one of the licensees that restricted access to us in a gaming high limit gaming area. They didn't know that our agents were there undercover, and they tried to restrict them access to a high limit area, and that also complaint and a fine.
Yeah, for my part, if that happens, that's almost absolutely going to be a complaint. Miss Police Chief Marusich, welcome. Is Mr. Krasinski here? DC Krasinski? I assume not. So you're going to be our resident historian. Could you? So there's been debate inside the board. This is as internal as we get, and this is for our benefit as much as it's for anyone else's. Can you take us through some of the iterations or some of the discussions that have happened internally? We've had different chiefs, like one audit chief in particular, who had one interpretation, and we've struggled with this over the years.
Yeah, I think I can provide a little bit of history.
Okay.
Christy Marusich for the record. I think, this has been so problematic over the years trying to navigate through this, because when we look back at what the spirit was for this statute and for the policy for Nevada, it's difficult to know exactly how far. And I don't think when the language was crafted, we really had, maybe the legislators actually had all the different scenarios that we're looking at today. And so we've kind of evolved. I think that there's been some conservative approaches, and then there's been what we've tried to do is to mitigate some of these things to allow our licensees to do business and be competitive, but also, give them good guidance that's consistent. And I think that's the nature of what we're trying to do here today. I think that there's been a lot of scenarios that are posed where you have high level players, you have celebrities, you have licensees that are wanting to engage with them, make sure that they're comfortable in their properties, stay competitive. But then also you have, the public access to games. And so what can we do to try to find that, that collaboration together with what's acceptable within the terms of the law?
And Chief Taylor, I think you can confirm that my direction to you and your staff has been to find a set of regulatory restrictions that is as the least onerous as possible. That is only those necessary for and that comport with law.
I agree with that statement that you've made that pretty clear to me as the
Yeah.
chief of enforcement.
I mean, going forward, if for example, if there's a scenario where it wouldn't be a high roller scenario, but it might be a celebrity scenario. There have been requests to have private gaming area, salon type areas without limits, the high limits of high roll rooms as we have now. That'd be something the legislature would probably need to carve out to get us around that. That's something that the industry or individual properties could bring forward.
Just one other thing I wanted to mention, Christy Marusich for the record. Board Member Katsaros, you were talking about access down a corridor and access, if people could find their way. I think another thing that comes to mind is that if the public doesn't have knowledge that gaming is going on back a house or in more secluded parts of the property, they may not have access to the information that it's available. That's, I think, what we were looking at there with that point.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the language that we were talking about, the notice. They need to be provided ample notice. It can't be 8-point font either,
Right.
and blending into the wall so that it's a reasonable person couldn't even see it anyway. It needs to be visible. And some of that gets into subjectivity. I certainly wouldn't want to codify into regulation that says, okay, it needs to be this font, say exactly this, but you need to, that's why I love the fact that you've got some shared discretion here, right? That's part of the wisdom of a lot of our regulations. Everything doesn't always fit into a perfectly wrapped Christmas box. It just doesn't happen that way. So that we've got shared discretion in many of these instances. And this is a prime example of one where I think we need to maintain that.
I have a question. This is on another note, unless you're on this. Is there an estimate as to what number of gaming areas would fall solely under the grandfather exception? As in not falling under other exceptions. Do you guys have an idea of what wouldn't fit within the other exceptions, but just the grandfather exception?
This is James Taylor. There's maybe 5 or 6 areas that we've always had question or concern about the years that have been allowed, but um, different chiefs before me were not always comfortable with the decisions that were made, and they are off the gaming floor. So there might be half dozen.
Okay, thank you.
There may be even more. I don't, you think of more?
Yeah, it's hard to say. We don't track it specifically.
Okay. I think we've laid a good record here. This is something that's been challenging inside the board. Do you have any further questions, Alex?
I don't believe I do at this time either, but I do want to echo what you just said there, Chair. Yeah, if somebody restricts somebody in a manner that was just suggested, because there's, for whatever reason, typically it's going to be some sort of celebrity or what have you, and all of a sudden they restrict you. That's a clear violation under the statute, and I'm glad we've taken that action.
Yeah, and just to make it clear how chair discretion is used, there's a recommendation that will come up from the respective division. So I'll have DC Marusich and Chief Taylor, for example, in this space, they'd make a recommendation based on their enforcement needs. And so it's not just an ad hoc decision that I make based on, who I know or like. It's a straight decision, and I think they're generally very well grounded. All right. Well, all right. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate your presentation, Mr. Bell. That was outstanding. Let's go on then to interested parties and their comments. If there's anyone who'd like to step forward and make comments, please do. In the north or south. Whoever gets up here first, we'll start in that part of the state.
Good afternoon, Madam Secretary, Member Watkins, Member Katsaros, and Chief Gibson. I'm Thomas Wright with Wynn Las Vegas. This is an important issue to us. Obviously, we appreciate the ability to be here today to hear your questions on the issue. We would request time. We don't have specific comments today, but we would request the ability to come back to you with specific written comments to the proposed regulation.
Okay. When was this noticed, if I can ask? Senior Dagenkill.
If memory serves, Chair, I believe it was mid-December, but I believe Madam Secretary have a better date for you.
Mr. Chairman, it was posted on December 20th or
Okay.
21st, somewhere around there.
All right. So with the holidays, that's reasonable.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, please step forward. Miss Valentine.
Good morning, Happy New Year. So, Madam Secretary, Member Watkins, Member Katsaros, Chair Gibson. My name is Virginia Valentine, and I'm with the Nevada Resort Association, and I want to thank you for holding this workshop. I think that was very informative. Some of the questions that some of you asked, I think, were some of the questions I was hearing. I think there was some interest in knowing where this was coming from or why you were coming forth with a new regulation now, because a lot of amendments to regulations come through. A new regulation kind of makes people say, what's going on? So I think we share the same interest in having something that is clear. Many of the questions today I heard were about definitions and interpretations of how this is going to work. And I think we also have some questions about how these are going to be operationalized. So I would just echo Mr. Wright's comments and ask that we have a little bit more time to respond and to think through how this is going to work actually on the gaming floor. Thank you.
No, thank you, Ms. Valentine. It's always good to see you. So we won't hold the vote today, but I'd ask that we do get comment. I'd like to hear, frankly, that the industry, please keep in mind industry and Ms. Valentine and Wynn, if you would, the needs of enforcement. We're trying to balance those two things. That is not interfering in market forces, your ability to serve your patrons, while at the same time allowing enforcement access and the public access and ensuring the integrity of our games. So those are the two things we're trying. Any other comments, north or south? Okay, and Madam Secretary, in the interim, we will look forward to comments written from the industry and others.
Yes, as they're received, they will be distributed and posted on the website if they are public. If they're confidential, they will be distributed amongst board members only.
Okay, wonderful. And with that, then we won't hold a vote today, just based on that discussion. Let's go to public comment. Is there any additional public comment, north or south? Okay, I see none. And with that, I will close the workshop. Thank you very much for attending.